The next area we want to cover here is taking a look at the structure of Roman change over time. And what we want to think about here is that in this picture, we're talking about a relatively stable state that is growing, it's organized, it has significant wealth, it is being successful in maintaining its independence, expanding its trade network. In other words, Rome is a wealthy city and is increasingly wealthy. And what we want to think about is how now, what are the internal problems that were arising in the time frame of the early republic, and how did they solve them? Every society has problems, and we saw, for example, in ancient Athens, right? We took a look quickly at the acts of, say, someone like Solon, who was, as a compromising politician, giving each side in a major battle something that would give them a reason to continue involved in the state. In the Roman example, now that we have laid out the idea that there are significant differences between the patricians, who are essentially running the show, and the plebeians, who are basically doing all the work, there has to be some sort of way for them to overcome their issues or problems. Because if they stay essentially distinct and separate, this society has a significant crack down the middle of it that will in many ways destroy it if the push comes to shove. All right, let's take a look at the first thing here. As noted, the plebeians, who made up the vast majority of the soldiers in the Roman army and the vast majority of laborers, had in many ways been actively discriminated against. Let's go back for a second. Remember Hammurabi's law code in Babylonia? It had actively discriminated against people on the basis of their gender. Women were in many ways treated differently, and of course on the basis of social status or economic status. If you were a male with great wealth, the law code was a very different thing for you than if you were a poor woman or a slave. But the idea here is that many societies have law codes and that they need to in some ways provide structure. But if they don't apply to all, or if they are not even written down, how do you know what they are? So for example, the Roman law code was not categorized in one place. It was sort of bits and pieces. There's no like written Roman constitution, for example. There's no codification of law in one place at this time. The law code was unwritten, and it was sort of by a sense of custom and understanding, but the patricians, remember, ran the whole legal system and ran the whole landholding system and things like that. So let's say a plebeian would go into court, and the law that he is or she is alleging was somehow changed or broken wasn't written down. And the judge and the judges are patricians, the other people in the room are patricians, and you're from the outside group. I think we understand what's going to happen there. There's not going to be any sense of justice or fairness there, especially because the law code isn't written. All right. What's going to happen then is that the plebeians are going to try and think of the only leverage they have to actually get the law code written so they know what they have to live with and live under. So, around the year 494 BCE, at the same rough time period that, say, there's events happening in the Greek part of the world, right, as they're struggling with the problem of the Persians, the Romans are struggling with the idea of getting the law down on paper. And what happens is the plebeians essentially go on military strike. They basically say, we know that we are the backbone of the military, the backbone of Roman stability. We're the backbone of any chance that Rome can expand. And if we don't get what we want, we're walking, to put it in common tense, right? So they're going to walk out of Rome and not participate unless the plebeians get what they want, which is some sense of at least understanding what the law is by getting it down on paper. As a tactic, it works. It gets the patricians notice. So what happens next is in the coming years, they put together what's called the 12 Tables of Law. It's a relatively short document, and it offers us some structure of understanding what's going on here. But it essentially, though, in its last clause, one of its very last clauses, it states very clearly that there's no way that legally anybody from the patrician class could intermarry with somebody from the plebeian class. In other words, the law code is going to be laid out there now. It's going to be for all to read and understand, but the patricians have a guaranteed status by law that they will not have to ever intermarry with the plebeians. It essentially is setting up a sort of a separate and unequal kind of doctrine. Now, we've already seen that, for example, in the Hammurabi's law code with the 282 clauses from Mesopotamia, right? There was in the law code guaranteed discrimination, if we want to use that term, Well, here we're back. In Rome, they're creating a law code, they're writing it down, but built within it is the absolute inequality of the plebeians. Now, once it is put together and laid out there, very quickly, now that it's on paper, not just a rumor or a concept, now that it's down on paper, for example, that patricians and plebeians cannot intermarry, that they're going to stay as distinct classes, that goes into the next series of debates, and very quickly, within a few years, the Hortensian law, it's called, it might be referenced in your reading, is going to change the system, and now patricians and plebeians will be treated equally under the law, at least in theory, and they can intermarry in theory should that take place. So that's going to be sort of a trend in Rome that's going to stabilize what Rome is trying to do, and now they have removed some of the issues within the community that could lead to schism and to civil war. It's not going to solve all the problems of the world, but some of the significant interests that had kept the patricians separate from the plebeians, now at least those lines are being erased. What does not change, and this is what we see in the 12 Tables of Law, if you see an example in your text or you look it up. Essentially, it lays out some very significant things for us to look at as a way to understand Roman society. Remember, every law code provides us a window into how a society functions, and this is not anything different with the 12 Tables of Law. What we have is in the 12 Tables a very clear statement that the father, the pater familias that we talked about earlier, the father figure of society is enshrined with all power, to the point, for example, even of life and death. Should a child be born into the family and the father of the family, whether it's the grandfather, father, or whoever's in charge of the family, the oldest male who's in charge of the family, if they see the child as somehow deformed, they can order the death of the child, or they can sell the child into slavery. They have literally the power of life and death. The pater familias, the father figure, has that power to control the whole household, as we addressed earlier, religious belief, land holding, economic opportunity, marriage alliances, and in this case, has the power of life and death over children. Also within the 12 Tables, there are explicit statements on the idea that essentially women are legally going to be kind of equated with children. All right? And here's the idea. That women will be accepted in Roman society, that's not in doubt. That they're going to have inheritances, that's not in doubt. That they'll make marriage alliances and be seen in public at various events. None of that is controversial. But what's stated here explicitly is that women are going to sort of be permanently treated as children by the law code, that there must always be an adult man who will make decisions for her should she try to have any transaction over, say, selling part of her inheritance or a marriage alliance of some sort with another family. It enshrined the idea that women were secondary in terms of their thinking in Roman society. They were not equal in citizenship. They were not welcome to, increasingly get involved in politics or other things like that. It is basically saying that a woman, yes, she exists. Yes, property can transfer itself through her and through her children, but she really doesn't count as an independent thinker. Now, there's a possibility, if you ever did as a family member want to have a daughter or a wife or an aunt, for example, set aside legally to be able to transact their own business, you could do some paperwork to explicitly state that she is going to be operating on her own. And that was applied a few times, but nonetheless, the general idea is that women are subservient to the men in their family, and that is sort of the ultimate patriarchy that we've seen in other cultures as well. That the automatic sort of default setting is that men are in charge, and that's the way it works, and then the rest of the conversation is about the roles of women, children, and slaves. Right. Another thing that was very interesting inside the 12 Tables of Law is it spends a significant amount of time talking about property rights. It even talks about the idea of, say, things like what we would consider libel and slander, right? Either saying something vicious against somebody or writing it. Romans, remember, are very suspicious of anybody trying to undermine their authority and their power or their reputation. So within the 12 Tables, there's even some comments about, should someone sing a lewd song or a nasty song alleging that you're somehow a horrible human being or inefficient as a politician or whatever. that could get you the death penalty. That the idea here is that the law code is to protect the individual as much as possible, and in their concept, they think about family structure and then individuals within families as a key element. And you'll see that as you read through. There are also some other significant statements there about debt. For example, in theory, if somebody goes deep into debt, they eventually can be seized and then sold into slavery. So that gives you that one sense of the idea that the ultimate form of personal bankruptcy in Roman society could be that you are seized and enslaved as the ultimate way to settle your debts. And then the key thing that comes out the very end of the document is that it is explicitly stating that the two classes, patricians and plebeians, cannot intermarry, and within a decade or so, through much activity by the plebeians, they do remove that clause and break it down. Make sure that you take a look at many of the ideas that we have covered here, and as you look forward into the next kind of sections, make sure you have control of this information. Double check that you're getting it from your text as well as from this lecture material, and then of course, do take a close look at those sample questions.